You spoke about this earlier with, focus on gaming and a handful of other places, but then also now this new sort of vector that may be unexpected on prediction markets. And so I'm curious as it relates to like maybe breaking this into sort of retail and enterprise for a second here. When you think about the that sort of delineation, how do you think about the enterprise side and how do you think about the retail side as it relates to Somnia? And are those different for now or will they evolve later?
Interesting. So ultimately, both of these parties sit on the same substrate, which is Somnia as a piece of infrastructure. And then the next step for us, and this is very early, by the way. In fact, I think you're the second podcast I've mentioned this on. What we are building towards next is kind of a club that's enshrined in the chain itself. So there's a central limit order book, which everything sits on top of. Because at the end of the day, these entertainment experiences, people are trading items, prediction markets, and that kind of enterprise, those kind of larger enterprise models, it's all clubs at the end of the day. That's like the fundamental building block that we've come to realize. And so what the next piece of technology, the next iteration you'll see in the next quarter is kind of a enshrined club that sits across all these apps. So when the retail consumers are coming in to like a video game, like an entertainment experience, they're buying and selling items that will be transacted through that club at the end of the day. Or when a big kind of financial institution is using, I don't know, a future prediction market for a reinsurance product or an insurance product, that will sit on top of this club at the end of the day. So that's the way I kind of see it, where the infrastructure binds these parties together, but they have very different front doors at the end of the day. I don't know, maybe. Actually, probably the consumers will still participate in those prediction markets because people like to gamble, they like to take a punt and take a bet. But I think really they all kind of get linked together by this fundamental club that sits across everything. That is very new, though. That is literally hot off the press. So you're getting some alpha there.
Appreciate it. So looking to the future, if Somnia is wildly successful, what's the second order effect on internet or the digital economy that people aren't ready for?
Whoa, that's a really interesting question. There's two things. So one is what we would have said, what I've said for the whole time, which is this idea of more people be able to create digital content and monetize that in a much more egalitarian way. So this idea of consumers creating small micro experiences with the use of AI tools, publishing those and using the blockchain as the monetization mechanism. I think that you'll see a shift from today, people can create content in terms of text, they can create videos, they can create images. The next formation of that, I think, is these digital immersive experiences, be those 3D or 2D, which are entertainment products at the end of the day. So I think that is one big change that I hope we end up enabling. And I think the reason why I think we have a better shot at that than, say, something like a Roblox does, is I think decentralization means that you get much better economics and many more people can access this rather than the economics in a lot of these centralized Web2 platforms are awful. They take like 70%, 80% take rates. It's awful. So that's one thing. I think the other thing is this idea of blockchain, this new primitive of like insurance through prediction markets, I think is a really interesting one as well, which is a new one we're starting to explore now. So I think these are like the two things that will potentially change the digital landscape fundamentally.
When you think about the maybe a myopic challenge to either metaverse or just core infrastructure related to enabling some of the vision that you just espoused, what's the one maybe obstacle, if you were able to solve for it, remove it, you think creates the best setup for success?
Oh, that's another really good question. It's got to be tooling. So the problem today is that the tooling, in order to do any of this stuff, requires incredibly high-skilled specialists, basically game developers or people who really understand how to build things within game engines like Unity and Unreal. That's a very specialist and hard-to-attain skill set. Requires years of study and learning. So really, you need to democratize that tool set. And so I think AI has a good shot at doing that. And we're investing heavily in this kind of AI generative content angle to help more people be able to build this content so that many more people build the content. That means you get more content. That means you find more fun content and you bring consumers at the end of the day. So I think there's that side. I think there has been a fundamental issue on the blockchain infrastructure side. If you ever had any of these experiences that scaled up to a lot of users, existing blockchains would not scale sufficiently and you'd have massive problems. This is why today you see everyone building an L2 basically. Whenever they get to a certain scale as an application, they have to move into their own chain because they can't scale with the shared infrastructure. We want to make sure that doesn't happen so that the shared infrastructure is sufficiently performant so everyone can plug into it. Because I think then you get what we call composability of the applications. So an example of this in video games, for instance, but we've seen it in DeFi, right? You've seen it before in DeFi, but I think you can apply this to every industry if you had enough performance on chain. So in gaming, for instance, if I build a leaderboard system that works really, really well, I can put that on chain as a protocol, then someone else can use that same leaderboard system. Or I make a loot box system, put that on chain, someone else can use that loot box system. So because of this, you have these well-defined components which then other people can pull very quickly. That makes it much easier and quicker to build these video games. Therefore, you get more games being released, and therefore you find more fun video games. I think if you look at the traditional games industry, most of the major genres over the past 20 years have been all modifications of existing games. So a MOBA was a modification of Warcraft 3. Survival shooters were a modification of Armor. So they're all mods of existing games because these mod platforms enable more people to create in a much easier way, and therefore more content gets created, and therefore you find these new things. And I think blockchain has a shout to enable that at a mass scale of like UGC with lots of these components that are pluggable together. So I think there are two things. One is the tooling. One is having a blockchain that's sufficiently performant that you can have this composability. And I still think there's more to this as well in terms of that composability. I think you can start to apply to lots of different industries. We're just very focused on the entertainment one right now.
Got it. And maybe going back to more of a personal and a leadership, sort of reflection. I always imagine that most folks see like mainnet launch, and that in their mind they get this vision of mission control for the Apollo missions, where there's this big room and everybody's like watching different dials and so forth. But I'm curious what actually keeps you up at night as the CEO and founder, as it relates to post mainnet launch. Is there any like one thing that again, you lose sleep over, or that you're constantly thinking about?
Oh, that's actually quite a weird one. There's loads of different things. I think for me, the thing that I always think about is we've created this new technology that enables these new capabilities. So this super high performance EVM compatible blockchain. There are a lot of new applications that I don't even think we know are currently possible because of the blockchain technology that we built. And so for me, it is always thinking about, so we have this strong thesis around gaming and entertainment. We found this new one now in kind of prediction markets, but I think there are probably a load more. There's the thing that keeps me up is how do we enable kind of a broad set of developers to be aware of this technology, use it in a much easier fashion, and then create these new applications that have never before been seen. So one of the things we're doing in the next month in October, we're adding this thing we've called Somnia Streams, or we should call it Somnia Chain Stream. It basically turns the Somnia blockchain into a similar API to like Firebase or Superbase, if you've ever used that in the Web2 world. So basically a global pub sub where you can listen to data, subscribe to data, and then publish the data to chain in a very easy manner. The reason we built that is basically it means that Web2 developers can now start onboarding and using blockchain tech much easier because they have familiar APIs that they're used to in the Web2 world, but it's backed by a blockchain at the end of the day. And so that's, I think, the thing that keeps me up most at night is thinking about the different avenues and the different technology components we can add to broaden out the developer set that can explore this new space with us and find these new applications that were never before possible. Stress about that a lot. And also, this also comes down to go-to-market things, right? It's like, where do you need presence? How do you make sure developer relations is in all the right places, turning up to relevant events, making sure you're kind of pulling in all the developers from all the places you can. I think that keeps me up most of the night at the moment.
What's your sense today of the net flow of Web2 to Web3 developers? Meaning, I think at any given point in time, Web3 is, acquiring, so to speak, Web2 devs and users. How do you think about that dynamic, and where do you see it right now in sort of the current market?
Yeah, so I will touch on this with the gaming industry in particular, because I'm very connected to that. And then I'll talk about it slightly broader. So in the gaming industry, there is currently gaming is a challenged industry because fundraising is very hard in the games industry at the moment for Web3 and Web2. And what you're seeing at the moment is a deconsolidation phase from the big AAA publishers. These big guys like EA, Activision, Blizzard. Lots of the talent is kind of leaving that or being fired from there because of challenging revenue times. And then what I'm seeing is these are people are forming new studios. We call them breakaway studios, and there's lots of these new studios being formed. Now, there's a natural skepticism from game developers about Web3. primarily because in 2021 cycle, so many scams, so much bad stuff that a lot of them got very turned off from it. But if you can catch them and find them and evangelize them and preach them about there's new revenue opportunities, there's new models, there's new ways you can attract and retain players. Once you give them the realization that actually Web3 gives them new mechanisms, they are much more interested and much more inclined. So I'm seeing a lot of new breakaway studios coming into the space. I think this has also massively helped from the regulation perspective because regs are getting much cleaner and clearer. Devs are willing to take that risk. So at a broader set, I'm also seeing more developers come into the space from Web2 to Web3 because I think now they had ideas, they had beliefs, but they didn't want to do it because they were like, I might get the SEC might come after me or might get put in jail for some reason. But now because regulation is getting much clearer and cleaner, I'm seeing a lot of new developers come in who are super smart. There is a competition though with AI. I think if I look at startup founders, the big choice they have to almost get pushed into AI because there's so much VC capital there right now, which I always find a bit sad because I'm like, you could do something really cool in Web3, but because the VC capital is there, there's still, I would say, the net inflow is to AI, but there is a lot more coming into Web3 and crypto because of the reduced regulation. And then you're also seeing big traditional companies come in now as well. Like you've got your Stripes, you've got your Googles. They're starting to come into play now, again, because of regulatory clarity, I think. So I'm very bullish on the developer ecosystem space. I think it's growing at quite a good clip compared to bear markets, compared to previous cycles, because regulation is much, much cleaner now.